The first time Diane told me I was good enough, she said it like it was a neutral fact, not a verdict. We were at my in-laws' kitchen table, plates still warm from dinner, and she set her coffee down with a sigh. "You come from a different world, Amy. He deserves someone who understands how things are done." I was 27, newly married to her son, Marcus, and still half convinced she was joking. She didn't smile. Marcus changed the subject, laughed at something on TV, and let the sentence sit between us like a stain. That's when I understood the difference between a mother who loved her son and a woman who saw him as hers to control. Diane's barbs were small at first, passive comments about my job, quiet corrections when I packed a casserole for a family dinner, little lessons on how real hosts did things. But they were constant. If I chose a career move she disliked, she'd call Marcus and plant doubts. If I argued, she framed it as concern for his well-being. He'd listen to her because she always did look like she knew the right way to fold a napkin or talk to a school principal. I looked like the stranger she'd never accept. I tried to meet her halfway. I learned to iron the tablecloth the way she liked. I softened my answers at gatherings. Nothing changed. The words "not good enough" became a private meter for how she graded me. After 3 years of steady undermining, Marcus stopped standing up for me. He'd say, "She's my mother, Amy. You have to give her space." I started to see that giving space meant letting my partner drift toward his mother's judgment. The marriage didn't end in a fight. It ended quietly, with more silences than arguments. Marcus moved back into Diane's house the summer he lost his job. He told me he needed time to figure things out. Diane told him she'd help. I told myself moving out wouldn't be a surrender. I packed my things, drove across town, and started over. Rebuilding was granular work. I took a night shift at a rehearsal venue doing event coordination, learned bookkeeping from a coworker, and later enrolled in evening classes for small business management. I lived by lists and savings jars for a few years. Slowly, the work added up into contracts, then clients, then a modest cleaning and concierge business that catered to small rental properties and tight-budget homeowners. It was not glamorous, but it was mine, a place where I set the rules. I didn't want revenge at first. I wanted distance. But distance is a luxury when people you once trusted keep standing in your path. Over the years, I'd run into Diane in grocery store aisles and at neighborhood barbecues. She never apologized. She acted as if the past had nothing to do with the present. I'd learned to smile and move on. Then the rumor reached me through an old friend, Jenna, who still kept tabs on our hometown grapevine. Diane's husband, Marcus's father, had died 2 winters ago, Jenna said. Diane had liquidated some assets and moved into a smaller apartment. Marcus had moved with her. A year of missed rent, a repossessed car, and a few ill-advised loans had left the family worse off than their kitchen table assurance of control had suggested. Jenna added, almost casually, "Diane's been taking odd jobs. Cleaning, babysitting. She told a neighbor she wasn't proud, but bills don't care who you are." Hearing that should have muted my anger, made me pity the woman who'd once given me rules for folding napkins. Instead, it focused me. The years of being talked down to sharpened into a clear, practical thought. If she was taking cleaning work, she was vulnerable in ways I could see and verify. If I needed closure, the cleanest kind of closure would be practical and public. Not a screaming match, not a public shamming, but a quiet demonstration that I had the power to decide who worked in my home and on what terms. I started taking notes, not of slights, of facts. The neighborhoods Diane frequented. The temp agency that posted ads for domestic workers. The little Facebook buy-sell group where neighbors recommended housekeepers. I shadowed my own business practices, background check vendors, fair contract language, and local agency procedures for hearing domestic help. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about building a situation where I could make a choice and hold to it. 2 weeks later, I placed a posting with a local staffing agency I'd worked with for cleaning contracts. Full-time housekeeper role, Monday through Friday, live-out, benefits, and an emphasis on reliability and discretion. I wrote the posting with care, concise requirements, clear pay, and a line about prior references required. Then I let the agency do what it did best, collect applicants. On the 3rd day, the agency sent me a candidate list. I skimmed the names and resumes as part of my usual vetting process. Then I froze. Last name, first name Diane Walker. A photo I recognized before I read the details, the same set of soft, practical eyes that had judged my table settings at 27. Her application was straightforward, listed prior occasional cleaning gigs, a short note explaining financial need, and a request for flexible hours. My heart sped up, but my voice remained steady. I called the agency and scheduled an interview. I asked for it to be at my home during the afternoon so I could see how she presented herself in the environment she'd be working in. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Jenna. I didn't tell anyone. When Diane accepted the interview, she sounded uncertain but polite. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be there." I marked the date on my calendar and closed the file. For the first time in a long time, the problem felt like it had a practical solution. A single decision point that would let me act with control rather than simmer in resentment. The interview was a week away. I used the time to prepare the house, to outline questions, and to rehearse the neutral tone I planned to keep. I didn't want theatrics. I wanted facts, observation, and a clear outcome. When we sat down in my modest kitchen that afternoon, the conversation would either be a closing of a chapter or the opening line of something I couldn't undo. Either way, I intended to be the one who chose what came next. The interview was on a wet Thursday afternoon. Diane arrived 10 minutes early, clutching a small canvas tote and wearing the same conservative cardigan I remembered. The one she'd always told me made me look too casual at family events. She stood at my doorstep like a guest, like the woman who once judged my napkins. I invited her in, led her to the living room, and kept my voice even. "Thank you for coming. The agency sent your application." I read it. She sat, smoothed her skirt, and smiled the way someone practices a smile in a mirror. "I appreciate the chance. I won't let you down." I started with the practical questions. Availability. Experience with laundry and floor care, whether she could follow a checklist, whether she had reliable transportation. Each answer was short and careful. When she said she could do weekday mornings, I asked if she had any commitments that might interfere. She admitted to a part-time shift at a diner 2 evenings a week. I said that was fine. Then I moved to specifics. "This position is different from the odd jobs you've listed. It's full-time, Monday through Friday. You'll be working in my home when I'm here. I expect you to follow a written schedule, use our cleaning supplies, and treat the job as a professional contract. Pay is above the market rate. We provide a written offer, taxes withheld, and paid time off after probation." Diane blinked. You pay taxes? That's more than some places do." Her voice had a quick edge of surprise, as if discovering a new fact about the rules she had taught me. "It's a real job," I said. "Not charity. I need reliability, and I compensate for it." She hesitated, then nodded. "I can do that." Before I offered the position, I asked one more thing. "Do you understand boundaries? This position is professional only. No family advice, no comments on my family life, and if there's ever a problem, you take it to me or the agency, not to neighbors." Her face went hard for a moment, like she was measuring which version of herself to bring. Then she said quietly, "Yes." I handed her the agency's standard offer and the employment agreement I'd had drawn up with my small business lawyer for my cleaning contracts. She read the terms, asked a few practical questions about who provided supplies and what constituted overtime, and then signed. She left with a promise to start the following Monday. I didn't relish the small victory. I felt deliberate, careful, as if I'd chosen the exact words to keep everything fair and unambiguous. That felt right. The first day on the job was awkward in predictable ways. Diane arrived with a thermos and a neat stack of cleaning cloths. She moved through the house with methodical efficiency, dusting, sorting, making the bed, and every once in a while she would look up as if expecting me to critique. I did not. I kept to my work, replying to emails, and let her routine unfold. An hour in, she paused in the kitchen and said, "You fold your towels a different way." I walked over, glanced at the towel stack, and said, "This way works for the linen closet we have. If you have a better system that saves time and keeps linens neat, show me. I'm open to efficient methods." She hesitated, then demonstrated a fold I'd never seen. It was neat, space-saving. "That's efficient," I said. "Use that." She seemed surprised by the approval. She worked faster. For the first time since I'd set the posting, she seemed like a hired professional rather than a critic on my living room couch. 2 weeks in, the novelty wore off and ordinary friction set in. Diane had habits from years of running a household her way. She left cleaning supplies out. She rearranged a decorative tray with the kind of small corrections she once offered me over casserole dishes. When I asked her to follow the checklist and put supplies away after use, she bristled. "That's how I've always done it," she said. "So was I answered, "until I found a better way for this home." I didn't raise my voice. I handed her the printed checklist. "If something needs to change, tell me. We'll discuss it, then update the list." She folded the checklist into her apron and said nothing. A week later, Marcus showed up. He stood in the doorway in his work boots, eyes flicking between Diane and me. "What's going on here?" he asked, the same tone he once used when he wanted someone else to decide. "She's my housekeeper now," I said. "She applied through the agency. She's employed." Marcus blinked like someone who'd been told the rules had changed without his notice. "You hired my mom," he said slowly, as if testing whether I'd be embarrassed. "Yes," I said. "She's bound by the same contract as any employee. She has a schedule, a rate of pay, and reported hours. If she's late or doesn't follow procedure, I'll treat it like any performance issue." He opened his mouth, maybe to ask for special treatment, maybe to remonstrate. Then he shut it and left. That moment was quieter than any confrontation I had imagined. There was no triumphant speech. There didn't need to be. The structure I'd built, clear expectations, formal contract, payroll, did the work for me. Over a month, Diane settled into the routine. I paid her on time, provided a uniform and supplies, and documented her performance as I did with any contractor. I also enforced basic respect. No personal commentary in the house, no relaying of gossip to neighbors, and if she wanted to speak about family matters, she could ask for a private meeting. When she made a snide remark about how I didn't know how to hold a silver tray, I pointed to the policy binder on the counter and said, "If you have a concern, write it down and we'll address it in our weekly check-in." She was not used to being managed that way. For years, she'd managed from the moral high ground, telling others how to do things without being accountable. Being on the receiving end of a schedule, paid leave, and written feedback humbled her in small, concrete ways. One afternoon, as we sorted linens, she sighed. "I honestly thought I'd never be the one cleaning for other people at my age." Her voice lacked bravado. It had a brittle honesty I hadn't heard from her before. "You don't have to like it," I said. "Just do the job and do it well. That's how you keep it. I'll do my part too, fair schedule, clear pay, and respect." She looked at me for a long second. "You mean it," she said. "I mean it," I replied. That exchange changed the tenor between us. She softened around the edges of her judgment. I remained firm where it mattered. We developed a routine. The checklist, the check-ins, the quiet professional distance that kept old comments from seeping back into daily life. People in our neighborhood noticed. Neighbors who once nodded politely now commented on the new arrangement, some with thinly veiled curiosity, others with open surprise. "Small world," one neighbor said. "Didn't expect that." I answered the same way every time. "It's a job." The real measure wasn't what the neighbors said. It was what Diane did. She came early when I had a late-night work call and stayed an extra hour without complaint. Once, when I was sick, she brought over soup and a small thermos of tea. It wasn't theatrics. It was a practical kindness I didn't have to demand. 2 months after she started, I ran into her at the supermarket. She pushed the cart this time, a list in hand, practical shoes on. She waited while I picked an item, then said, "I wanted to say thank you for the steady work, for how you handled things the first day." I was proud once, in ways I can't take back, but I see how wrong I handled some things. I didn't need an apology. I was not trying to humiliate her into remorse. I wanted boundaries restored and dignity preserved, mine and hers. I said, "I'm glad the job works for you." She looked at me for a moment and nodded. "I'll keep doing it well." When Diane came to clean the house now, she didn't offer judgment or advice. She showed up, did the work on the checklist, and left. Marcus called occasionally, asking for repairs or to drop something off. I directed him to use the agency platform or the calendar I maintained for household requests. If he tried to slip in reminders about family history or old criticisms, I politely redirected him. He had to learn what everyone else did. My house operated on rules I set. In the months that followed, nothing dramatic happened. Diane worked. I ran my business. We both kept the boundaries we had agreed on when she signed the contract. The job was not revenge in the sensational sense. It was a quiet unmaking of the power she'd held by default. The humiliation she'd once used as authority was replaced by wage slips and scheduled hours. That was the point. On a late Sunday afternoon, I found a small note tucked on my kitchen counter in Diane's careful handwriting. It read, simply, "Thank you for the steady work. I'm learning to be better at listening." I folded the note and put it in my back pocket before I left for a client meeting. I didn't show it to anyone. It felt private and enough. Sometimes people ask if I ever felt guilty for hearing my mother-in-law into a role that reversed our old dynamic. I tell them the truth. I felt a responsibility. I didn't hire her to punish her. I hired her because it was a way to set things right on my terms, with fairness, with clear expectations, and with the dignity of a paycheck. Diane still folds napkins differently than I do. She still has opinions. But when she walks through my door now, she carries a job folder, an ID badge from the agency, and a check stub. She's accountable. I'm in control of my home and my rules. And that, more than any dramatic showdown, was the real resolution I wanted. Next story. The first time I realized something was off, I was standing in my father's office, fumbling through his paperwork for my signature. "Where? The original will?" I asked my sister, Laura, who had insisted she handle Dad's estate arrangements after his death. She laughed a little too sharp. "Oh, Amy, don't worry your pretty little head. Everything's fine. The lawyer has copies. You'll see when the time comes." That was the problem. I wasn't stupid. I knew Dad had trusted me as much as her. But when she said she'd handle everything, she meant it literally. She kept the files, the passwords, the papers. And when I asked the lawyer directly, he said, "Laura called, said she had the original. She'll provide a copy when everything is ready." I knew she was lying. Over the next month, I quietly gathered information. I called old friends of Dad, who had been involved in the estate planning. I looked through bank records and property titles, and I checked every document Dad had ever signed in the past 10 years. Little by little, a pattern emerged. Laura had been moving assets, opening accounts under her name only, and quietly reshuffling ownerships so that when the will came into effect, she'd have the upper hand. It wasn't about money at first. It was about control. And she was the kind of sister who always wanted to be in charge. I spent long nights thinking about my options. Confronting her directly would be pointless. She'd lie, charm, and twist everything back to her favor. Going to Dad's lawyer wasn't enough either. If the original will had been altered or hidden, no legal argument would stop her immediately. So I turned to the one thing she couldn't manipulate: family perception. I started small. A phone call here, a subtle remark there. I mentioned casually to our cousin Greg that Laura had been very involved in the paperwork lately, and that Dad had trusted her judgment, but only in private. Then I texted my aunt, asking if she knew about certain transfers of property titles. I framed questions carefully, as if I were confused, concerned, not accusing. People listened. By the end of the month, whispers started. Laura, the polished, charming one, suddenly looked a little too polished, a little too eager to explain away every minor decision she'd made after Dad's death. Family dinners became tense. Aunts and uncles began asking questions. I stayed calm, answered politely, and let them think I was just trying to understand, all the while planting the seeds of doubt. The final piece fell into place when I discovered an old email thread Dad had sent to me 6 months earlier. He had expressed frustration that Laura didn't include me in decisions, that she sometimes bypassed him to make unilateral moves. I printed it. I didn't circulate it immediately. I waited until the family meeting we'd scheduled for Thanksgiving. That night, when the relatives gathered in the living room, Laura sat front and center, smug and confident. I waited until the conversation turned to Dad's estate. "Does anyone know why some of Dad's properties were sold without telling the rest of us?" I asked casually. I let my voice carry curiosity, not accusation. Laura blinked, then laughed nervously. "Oh, I didn't want to bother anyone. Everything's fine." I leaned back, smiling faintly. "Funny, I got an email from Dad last year. He mentioned he was worried about transparency, that he wanted us all involved." I placed the printed email on the table. Guess he wasn't wrong to be concerned. The room went quiet. Eyes flicked between me and Laura. I let the silence stretch. It was heavy, tangible. By the time dessert was served, Laura's charm had faded. Cousins and aunts were asking direct questions. My plan was working. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't accusing, I was letting the facts speak, letting the family draw their own conclusions. And by the end of the night, it was clear. Laura was on the defensive, isolated, and suddenly vulnerable. I walked home that night feeling a rare kind of calm. I wasn't done, far from it, but for the first time in months, I had the upper hand. I had started a chain reaction, and every step moving forward would be calculated, careful, and strategic. This was no longer about inheritance alone. This was about restoring balance and proving that deceit and greed didn't go unnoticed in our family. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I walked home from that dinner feeling the kind of calm that comes from finally pulling a loose thread. You know it will unravel, you just don't know how far. I spent the next morning making a list of what I needed: paper trail, witnesses, and one reliable professional who could verify numbers without taking sides. First call was to Dad's accountant, Maria. I told her I was trying to understand transactions after Dad died and asked, bluntly, if anything looked unusual. She put me on hold for 10 minutes and then, quietly, said, "There are withdrawals and transfers I can't account for. Come by and we'll pull the statements." I drove across town and sat with a stack of bank records while she highlighted checks paid to names I didn't recognize and transfers labeled with vague notes. One page showed a large transfer into an account in Laura's name dated 2 weeks after the funeral. It wasn't a smoking gun on its own, but it was a pattern. Next, I went to the county recorder's office. Public records are the kind of thing people forget exists until they need it. The clerk printed a property transfer form. Laura had recorded a deed change on the house 2 months after Dad's signature on the latest will. The deed referenced a quitclaim that I'd never been told about. The document itself was filled out, notarized, and recorded. The notary's stamp was real. The signature looked like Dad, but my stomach tightened because the signature line hadn't been witnessed in the way I'd watched Dad sign legal papers before. I took copies. I didn't rush to confront Laura with these documents. Confrontation without preparation is theater, not leverage. Instead, I built a packet. The email Dad sent me 6 months earlier, Maria's annotated bank statements, the county deed copies, and a short chronology tying the dates together. I also quietly messaged Greg and Aunt Bate, asking if they could come to a family meeting the following Saturday. I didn't label it an inquisition. I said I wanted a conversation about transparency and Dad's wishes. On Saturday, the living room that had felt warm the month before felt guarded. Laura arrived with the same polished composure, but she was more reserved. She had to be, now that people had questions. Cousins, aunts, and 2 of Dad's old friends were there. I started the meeting by reading Dad's email aloud, let the words hang, then placed the bank statements on the coffee table. I walked everyone through the timeline calmly. Dad emailed me because he wanted all of us involved. 2 weeks after his funeral, transactions moved money into an account under Laura's name. The deed was recorded. Maria can confirm these transfers. Faces shifted. People leaned in. Greg spoke up first. "I helped Dad with some paperwork last year. He never wanted unilateral moves." Aunt Bate, who handled most family funerals and affairs, asked, "Why weren't we told about any of this?" Laura's smile cracked. She launched into an explanation about convenience, about protecting the estate from squabbling, about how she thought she was saving everyone from stress. Her words sounded practiced, thinner than they had the month before. Then Maria, who I'd asked to attend as a neutral witness, took a seat and explained the statements in plain terms. She didn't accuse, she described. There are transfers that lack documented approval from all beneficiaries, she said. It's irregular, and given the timing, it raises concerns many families would want answered. That clinical phrasing did more damage than any accusation could have. What changed the room wasn't theatrics, it was other people's memory. Uncle Ben recalled a call where Laura had asked him to sign a single-sheet transfer authorization months before Dad died. He thought it routine and signed. Cousin Tara said she'd been asked to trust Laura with handling the truck sale and had been told it was for estate upkeep. The anecdotes stitched together into a pattern none of them liked. Laura tried to steer the conversation back to family harmony, to remind people of Dad's character and her own devotion. But the evidence made harmony sound like silence bought by omission. Instead of a single confrontation, the family did something more decisive. They voted to pause any further transfers and to appoint a neutral trustee to inventory the estate until we could agree on distribution. It was a practical move, not a theatrical one, the kind that quietly removes power without public spectacle. Laura reacted with anger and then bargaining. She offered to let Maria oversee things if nobody objected. I said, "We need someone none of us manages directly. An outside trustee will keep us accountable." The family backed me. She stormed out and for the first time since Dad's funeral, found herself without a room full of polite nods. The weeks after the meeting were not dramatic courtroom scenes, just steady consequences. With the trustees' oversight, a small local fiduciary firm the family agreed upon transfers stopped. The trustee sent formal notices required by estate protocol, and Laura found she no longer had unilateral access to accounts or titles. She could have pursued legal action, but that would have been expensive and public. Instead, what happened inside the family did the work. People who had once flocked to Laura's side began to offer small withdrawals of support. Invitations to sit on committees stopped arriving. Holiday plans excluded her. Relatives who'd lent her money quietly asked for formal repayment plans instead of open-ended promises. The social currency she'd relied on evaporated because the family no longer trusted her stewardship. The isolation was practical, not vindictive. They were protecting assets and preventing further unilateral decisions. Laura tried to counterattack with charm and tears, but those things held little currency against ledgers and recorded deeds. She reached out to me privately, pleading for mediation and offering to transfer the deed back if no one would make a small scene. I told her I'd accept a written, notarized agreement that restored certain assets to the estate and placed them under the trustee's control. She signed. The signed agreement wasn't a legal triumph in court. It was a negotiated, private correction that stopped the immediate harm and created transparency going forward. The deed I had photocopied that day at the county recorder stayed in the trustee's file. The property was placed into the estate, managed, and appraised. We arranged for an independent valuation of items Laura had sold. Where possible, she returned funds or provided accounting for expenditures. Where that wasn't possible, the trustee accounted for losses and adjusted distributions accordingly. By the time we met again for the memorial on Dad's birthday, the family dynamic had shifted. Laura showed up, quieter and careful. She still spoke, but fewer people sought her out. Greg sat beside me at the small ceremony, and Aunt Bates squeezed my hand when nobody watched. Family members apologized in small ways that meant more than grand gestures. A returned call, an invitation to lunch, a candid conversation about how we would handle the estate together. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw the email in Laura's face or make speeches about justice. What I did was build procedures, regular accounting reviews with the trustee, shared access to key documents, and a simple rule that no sale or major transfer could happen without written consent from two beneficiaries. Those rules removed the opacity that had allowed unilateral moves in the first place. Months later, when the final distributions were made according to the original will's spirit, not perfectly, but transparently, I felt the resolution I'd wanted from the start. The money and property returned to their intended purposes: upkeep of the house for family gatherings, small stipends for nieces and nephews, education funds, and a donation Dad had always wanted to make to the community center. Laura received a share, but it was accounted for and assigned under the same rules as everyone else. Sometimes people ask if I felt satisfied. The truth is more nuanced. What I felt was careful relief. The family trusted each other again in practical ways. Laura had lost the easy authority she'd wielded, but she kept a relationship with some family members on new terms. I'd turned the family against her in the sense that she could no longer manipulate our default loyalty. We chose oversight and evidence over blind trust. Revenge had never been my goal in the first place. It was accountability. I wanted Dad's wishes honored and a system that would prevent the next person from quietly moving things around. I did what I had to do, gathered facts, invited witnesses, and let the family decide. In the end, being persistent and methodical did more than anger ever could. It made sure no one could steal a will and have the family look the other way.